Thank you so much, first up at the outset, for having braved the traffic of Bengaluru to be on time here. Very good afternoon to everybody who's gathered here. So many familiar faces from the press, so many familiar faces, obviously, from the sporting fraternity. The wonderful thing is it's not just restricted to cricket, it's beyond cricket as well. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, once again for being a part of this wonderful occasion. I know it's a grand occasion, but it almost feels like family. Every second person that I bump into is almost saying, "Enada macha, epada vanda? When did you come here? Hey, nethe vantiyada? How is it? How is that?" We've already spoken about Pongal. We've already spoken about idli, vada, dosa, the cup of coffees that you used to have at KSCA. So many wonderful memories. Thank you once again for making every person who steps into this city at home. And thank you so much, Anil, for gracing the occasion. Thank you so much, Mr. Madhavan, for taking your time out and being a part of this occasion. First things first, I've obviously read the book in its entirety. It's a very breezy read, and I'm not here to say that because I'm here. It's honestly a very breezy read. The reason why I say that is it's very conversational. More often than not, when you take out and read books around leadership, it could get a tad instructive. That's always the feeling that I've had. But this was very, very conversational, and it was quite a breeze. And I think one of the things that really struck me was something that Raman mentioned in page number 114, which I thought was the crux of everything, WE. He says, in sports, the focus is always on winners and winning. It is never about the journey. That is on page 114. And on page 129, he says, there are crests and troughs, but don't get bitter, get better. That's on page 129. The reason why I've just quoted these two as examples is because, WE, do you think this is pretty much the crux of the why of the book? Because one is, it focuses on process, and also the fact, it's switched on, I guess. It focuses on the process behind things, and also, as a sportsman, as a leader in business fraternity, there'll be plenty of ups and downs. It's about how you bounce back.
Getting back to that point that you made, it's easy for people to sort of see achievers perform and say, okay, great stuff, he's brilliant and whatnot. But what really doesn't come out is the journey that's brought them there. People would rather get inspired by learning about the journey, how they got there, what made them get there, than as against seeing Anil get 6 wickets every time he bowls, or Rahane getting 100 every time he bats. That is the end. But the journey that got them there is what is going to really inspire everybody. And in terms of us looking at sports people, what happens is, because every instant, there's something for us to learn. So many instances happening, we tend to forget, we tend to move on to the next one.
Anil, I mean, you've had a phenomenal career yourself, over 600 wickets in test match cricket, and you've had a long, long career. So when one looks at your career, when the next generation looks at your career, they go, wow. But in terms of the kind of effort that goes in, that's pretty much the essence of what Raman was talking about, isn't it? It's the journey with those ups and downs.
Yeah, before I get to that point, I'd like to congratulate Ram for this book. I've been a match referee on many occasions when the conversations between Ram and Javagal Srinath used to happen in the changing room or on occasions outside of the game, and invariably it would end in a draw. Because there was no way that Ram would step down on his argument, and no way that you would convince Srinath. Yeah, to get to the point, I think it's all about self-belief. I think for me, when I first came onto the scene, there were a lot of question marks more than answers. There were a lot more questions than answers when I came onto playing for India. Of course, Karnataka, my first captain is sitting here, Roger Binney. He was instrumental in giving us the kind of support that you would want as a youngster. Sri and I, both of us, Avi is also here. Avinash, all three of us made our debut in the same game. And the kind of support that you received from the Karnataka, the senior cricketers was instrumental in us going all the way. And like I mentioned, there were always doubts, questions, then answers. And then when those keep cropping up, I think it's your inner belief and your confidence in getting over that was critical. So I think in any journey, I mean, if you're a successful cricketer, you would go through your ups and downs. There will be a lot more downs than ups. Nobody looks at the failures that you have had when you look back at your career. Invariably, you look at all the good things that you have done in your career and not worry too much about the failures. So I guess it's all about taking success and failures in the same way. Invariably, we start analyzing failures too much and not really look at success in the way one needs to. Why have you been successful? Invariably, we focus too much of our energies in why we are failing rather than why we are succeeding. So I think that's something to me was a reinforcement. I think the kind of people that I had in the team and the support that I received from my senior players was exceptional.
Before we get to the business side of things, which I'm sure Madhavan will speak about, but you briefly mentioned the word debut, and this WE is a very, very special week for you, isn't it? Going back, to 1988, this was the week where you made your test debut. Pongal test matches, that used to be the norm those days.
It used to be a tradition, and people look forward to it. You would have a lot of people from Bangalore coming also for the test match. So Pongal week was always about test cricket. And I was fortunate enough to make my debut on my home ground about 32 years ago. It's a long time ago now.
Yeah, I didn't want to make you feel old. I just wanted to feel young myself. But yeah, I mean, WB played a very important knock in that second innings. Narendra Hirwani is here there. What a debut that was for Narendra Hirwani. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for him. So that was fascinating, 16 wickets in that particular test match. But coming back to leadership, coming back to management per se, business, more ways than one, mirrors cricket or sport overall?
Huge. Okay, first up, thanks Raman for getting TVS and me involved here. It's a pleasure being here. Vokes is a school senior. So we come from the same school, the Hindu school. And go back, I've been following him since 81, 82. That's when it probably passed out, thereabouts there. So congratulations first up on the book. Absolutely many similarities between what happens in the business life and sports world. As I was telling you offline, one of the things that cricket particularly is teaching India Inc. is talent does not mean success. Talent gets you somewhere, but cricket actually has shown if you don't combine talent with the amount of hard work that is needed, you're not going to get anywhere. So that's something which we are now seeing. It's a difficulty that we're facing in the business world. There are a lot of talented youngsters that are coming through, huge amounts. Talent was in short supply about a decade or 2 decades ago. You found anybody half as good, you take him in. Not anymore. Talented kids are coming through. The only problem is how do you get them to how do you convince them to put in that hard yards to make sure that then gets translated to success? So that's one massive learning that any sport and cricket in particular is teaching us. Because in India, we have quite a few examples where we are told on television time and time again, what a talent going waste. And then you go and analyze. It's probably one of the things that's missing is the effort that is needed. I hope I answered that.
Yeah. You believe everything that goes on in television? Well done. Okay, but very quickly, over to you, Anil, on that front. So talent is in abundance, I mean, in cricketing terms. So you played in an era which is probably completely different. Everything was different. We didn't have cell phones those times, no social media, absolutely nothing. So in a sense, if I were to use the word distractions, a tad less from what we get to see here. And therefore, how do you inspire the next set of youngsters coming into the field of cricket? Because you've assumed leadership roles, you are due to coach aside as well, you have coached before. So the next generation of cricketers, how do you inspire them?
I think, in terms of distractions, each era has its own share of distractions. So how you deal with distractions is what you have to come up with. And yes, of course, social media, even when we were playing, you had everyone else an expert of what I should be bowling and how I should be bowling and when I should be bowling. and per se on whether India should bat first or bowl first, or which bowler should bowl at what time. I think those comments were always there. But today it's more visible because of the social media. You interact, and that to me is the biggest not distraction, but I think that's something that all of us need to be aware of. And I think every generation, you just have to make sure that you stay away from all that, and then focus on what you need to do on that particular day and what your goal needs to be. So I guess that's the critical aspect. And the challenge today is that because of so many talented youngsters, the competition is really high. So you can't really let your guard down in any event, any particular match. Injuries may take you out of the game, and then again for you to come back into the team would be a challenge. So it's very important that today's youngsters need to realize that you can't let your guard down at any given point in time. You just need to be at it. There are a lot more opportunities, not necessarily for you to come back. So that's one thing that is an advantage. You need to look at that. At the end of it, I think whenever one thing that I would tell any youngster is, don't look at somebody. I mean, selectors are there to actually drop you, not pick you, because you pick yourself. At the end of it, your performances count, and then you certainly pick yourself, and the selectors or whoever is picking you is there to drop you, not really to pick you. So that's something that I think one needs to be aware of.
In terms of priorities, Anil, the generation that is coming in, the priorities with respect to the formats and stuff, do you see a change, or it's
No, I don't think so. I think everybody wants to play Test cricket. It's very clear. There's been a debate going around on 4 days, 5 days. I mean, the current generation certainly wants 5 days cricket. So that's something that is very obvious. And I don't think that's changed. Yes, there is some challenge in keeping everyone focused or pushed towards playing domestic competition, especially Ranji Trophy. That's something that you have seen in the recent past. Some players come back and play, which is really good. That's something that needs to be encouraged. But otherwise, I don't think there's any... yes, you can say that, if you look at the 3 teams today of the 3 formats, very few are common to all 3 formats. It's getting lesser and lesser. So you have players who are a part of the Test team, who are a part of the one-day team, and another team is totally different for T20. So in that sense, you have 3 different formats, 3 different teams, very few common players. But I don't think there is any dearth in people wanting to play the longer format. I think everybody wants to. They realize that that's the biggest challenge. And I'm sure that's going to be for a longer time.
Mental focus, WE, is something that you've spoken a lot about in that book, isn't it, of yours?
Yeah, that's very important, because given that there are a lot of distractions these days, and it's all a question of how you try and not allow yourself to be drawn into all those things. When I say that, it's not about the distractions that you have otherwise. It's all about how you just ignore people talking about you or against you all around you. That's very important. If you
How difficult or easy is it? How difficult or easy is it? Because, I mean, as just picking up from what Anil said, picking up from what you said, and picking up from what he says, Bala was talking about the fact that, an article is written about a youngster. So obviously, yeah, it's fair and square to say that I don't read newspapers, I want to focus on what I do, but I'm sure the news does reach you in some form or the other, more so in today's generation. How difficult or easy is it to keep it all away, go there, take guard, and score runs?
I suspect 90% of me invariably read the articles.
Exactly.
But anyway, besides the point, that's besides the point. The thing is that people have to have that maturity to think, as if somebody is writing about you, he is doing his job, he or she is doing their job. And your job is to try and be as better as you can the next time around. And that's what sport is all about. You don't either sulk or, sort of get absolutely overjoyed about what has happened, either good or bad. It's a case of having a convenient memory, as I always said. Get on, move on, keep going. That's what happens in sport, and you have no other option besides doing that.
And in business, I'm sure, I mean, you have held leadership positions across industries. Yes, I mean, cricketers, sportsmen do read newspapers, will have to contend a lot with the criticism that comes through, but you've got your general body meetings as well, where the shareholders are going to stand up and, criticize you or praise you, as the case may be. So how does a leader in that sense shut out everything and goes about doing his business?
Not as I said again, there's a lot of parallels that you can draw. Very clearly, in our case, if you're talking about shareholders, if you're talking about general body meeting, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. What happens more is inside the boardroom. Now, if like very much in cricket, if you actually plan very well, if you resource very well, and if you have the right team which you backed very well, then you're given a 3-year time. And if you can't, it's not that they expect you to turn in results in 6 months' time. That's the advantage the business life has compared to a sporting career where you put in the middle and then you expect it to perform on day one. So there is a subtle, there's a good difference there. But in that period, if you don't show up and if you don't perform, then that side of it is also pretty cruel. They then call your time out very, very quickly. They call the elephant in the room very quickly. These days, that patience is gone. And in fact, if you can go to a company like HP, you're as good as the last quarter. So you always have to be on your toes there. The difference is the promises on 4 quarters or 8 quarters, and you resource plan very well. That's the key there. You have that kind of leverage which sports does not offer.
Just speaking on that patience bit, Anil, to you, these days, obviously, there was always stiff competition for places. But do you kind of find this is an era, it's more now than it's been ever before, and therefore, in terms of patience that the selectors are willing to give somebody, the kind of run that somebody is given to somebody or a few others they're not willing to give. So do you kind of sense that in terms of the patience levels? Say, for example, he spoke about you're just given that one chance. If you fail, then you're pretty much done and dusted. All the hard work at the domestic cricket goes out for a toss.
Yeah, it is very difficult, for a player to have just a couple of chances. I think communication becomes a very critical aspect there, and how well you communicate with the player to make sure that he's comfortable saying, okay, it doesn't matter, you play 3 games, you're going to get 3 or 4 chances. Yes, there's a lot of competition. Like I've said, I think even when you fail, instead of taking that as a failure, I think it's important to just look at opportunities that you have currently. I think there are many opportunities for people to again come back and showcase their talent, be it in IPL or in Ranji Trophy or in other formats that you have. So I guess there are a lot more opportunities. I think it's all about understanding what roles you play, and then how you manage that will be critical. But having said that, yes, there's a lot more competition. There's a lot more pressure on the current players because of the various opinions that keep coming around. And one failure, and suddenly, heavens come down on you. So that's the part that one needs to be very mature about handling. Raman mentioned about the word maturity. I think it's not just about how players handle their own self, but also how we all look at the team and look at individual players. I think that needs to also bring in some maturity there.
Talking about communication, because that is something that Anil touched upon. So WE's book does talk a lot about a variety of captains that he's admired from the past, whether it is Clive Lloyd, who's beyond just a cricketer. He was trying to bring everybody under one roof. So that is something that he's fondly recalled in that book. He's spoken about Alan Border, who's a completely different style of captaincy. Arjuna Ranatunga, with the kind of resources that he had, winning that 1996 World Cup. Different leaders, different techniques is something that you've spoken about. Just emphasize a bit more on those leadership techniques.
See, it all depends on the kind of challenges you face and the situations you are put in. Like, for example, our own Anil had to handle that issue in Australia. And it all comes down to how you look at it and what you want to develop out of it, or whether you want to try and ensure that you arrive at a conclusion which is the right one. The important thing is that you need to know the end result that you're trying to achieve, and based on that, you try and take it along those paths. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a muddle.
I'll come to Anil on that issue very, very soon. But WE, on the subject of looking at something, you've used very interesting words in your book. You've said assessing a situation and judging your situation. Those two are very, very different, isn't it? It depends on the point of view that you're looking at. Just explain a bit more to us.
There could be synonyms, but judgment is final. Assessment can be always, revised. So it's very important. It's a play of words, but Um, it can, sometimes get a little bit overlapping, but assessment, as I sort of would like to explain it, as something that where you try and take your own time and then say, okay, assess the conditions that a player is put in or a person is in, and based on that, you can always form an opinion. Yes, that is only for then. Whereas judgment in my case is saying as X is no good or X is the best. Because all these things can change. Everything is subject to change. So you cannot have a final verdict all the time. Yes, there will come a stage, yes, if somebody's had a run and is not made good of it, yes, you can say, okay, this is not happening. But that's the distinction I'm trying to make in that book. Assessment is different from judgment in the sense that judgment is final. Whereas assessment can always be revised. You can always have a rethink.
Anil, how do you, being a part of the dressing room, being a leader of that dressing room during your playing days, step back from something momentarily if need be, yet there is not much time? People want you to share your opinions. There are certain opinions that people expect out of you. So at that point in time, as a leader, how do you step back and take a very objective view and assess the situation and come to a judgment?
I think you need a core group of players to support that. I was lucky. I mean, Rahul's here, Sachin, Saurav, Lakshman. Even during the Australia series that Ram alluded to, he spoke about the final outcome. The final outcome obviously is the game is bigger than any individual. So if you look at that as the final outcome and then say, okay, that is what you want to get to, then I think things fall in place. And if you have a good core group around you who are giving you the kind of support that you need at that point in time, and again, you have to distance yourself from the emotions of what is happening in a situation like that. Once you distance yourself from the issue, real issue, and then you need to deal with the issue rather than the personality. Invariably when conflicts happen, you try and worry too much about the personality and not really go into the real issue. So once you look at the real issue and then keep the personality out of it, and then if you have a good core group that can be very supportive, then I think things fall in place. And if you have the end goal in your mind and walk towards that and then try and see in a holistic way, then I think things come out. And I think that was the real important aspect when we face those issues, because you're never trained to deal with off-field issues as a captain. As a captain, you're probably trained to take decisions on the field, not necessarily off it. So this was one where I think the support that I had with the players there was immense, and I think that really helps.
I'll throw it open to all three of you on this one, because we are on the subject of leaders and dealing with situations. As you rightly said, you're never trained for such situation. One is experience, one is age. You're mature with age, that is one part. But when we talk about leaders, we say there are a few who are born leaders, so to speak. There are a few who are groomed to be leaders. Where do you stand on such matters? Anil?
No, I think as far as Indian cricket goes, I think you just learn on the job. I don't think anyone's born leader. You just throw them in the deep end and then see how they swim. And that's all it is. You learn from your experiences of being a player, dealing with situations, managing situations, and then knowing your teammates around and how that particular, you just watch and learn. I don't think there's any rule that, okay, so-and-so will be a perfect leader. And I think it's all about learning from the situation and then knowing what needs to be done at that moment. And like I said, you need to have the ability to step off from your personal goals and then look at the team in a larger context. And if one can do that, then I think it's a lot easier. So I don't think there's any one such school where you will learn about leadership of how to become a captain in India. I think it's just you just throw them in and then figure out.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned in my book. I've said you learn to become a leader as you do more of it. And in sport, you have that advantage of becoming a captain on the field. You make mistakes. You definitely will make mistakes. And out of your experience, you learn, because experience is a very, very tough teacher. It punishes you first and then teaches you the lesson. So that's the advantage I've tried to say that sports people have over probably the leaders in business, because they go through structured education, then they spend a few years, then they get to the top, and then they get to become a leader. Whereas sports persons have the advantage, or some even have, right from their young ages of leading the school teams, and leading all the way up to the other levels.
In that sense, I mean, to both your cricketers, in that sense, maybe an Australian system, does it kind of indicate that so-and-so is going to be the leader, and therefore they get groomed over a period of time? We've seen that in those instances in the past, in a sense.
No, I think it's about understanding and putting together some systems in place. Not necessarily that that's going to work, but I think in India, more or less, things have really worked. So I don't see a reason for us to have that, but I think it's important to obviously get the next potential leader into the group, and that's why I spoke about having a core group, which is very critical. It's not just, yes, you have one captain representing the team, but I think the core group is really crucial, and that's where you want to bring in, add a young player into that, take out a senior player. Those things automatically happen, as you go past a few years. But I think the core group is very critical, because the core group will then decide the culture of the team and then take things forward. Yes, you always have one captain at the helm. And once you have the core group, then it's very easy to identify. And I don't think it takes that much time to get the next captain to come in, and you won't have that kind of a transition period. So it's important that you identify a core group within the team and then groom them to take over. So I think decisions need to be made by the core group, and then once you're on the field, the captain takes the call.
Yeah, in a sense, that is the same for business, isn't it? The core group of people that you're talking about, because when you talk about success or failures for a company, it's invariably the CEO that gets highlighted, but it's effectively a core group of people. Those are making those decisions.
Absolutely. See, actually, it's true that the Indian academic system does not have it in it to create leaders of tomorrow. Yes, leadership is a module. Both of us have gone through that in R&B schools, but that does not guarantee you to be a leader there. So it's along the way, like both of them articulated, along the way you find somebody with the aspiration and the passion to go along with it. Then he's willing to work hard. He's got talent is not in short supply, as I said. Talent not in short supply. Therefore, once the passion along with the aspiration happens, those are the guys who make it to the top there. Yes, as it's always said, you are as good as the team, and the team is as good as you. So it's the leadership team. You call it the core group here. Back home, we call it the leadership team, which will have to come together to play that role of achieving the aligned goal. More often than not, if you see, if the companies that miss out, actually the issues will be very fundamental, very, very basic. Aligned goals will be a miss, big miss. You will find one function running in one direction, another function siloed and running in another direction. The moment all of them come together and see a common goal, which sometime back Anil alluded to, that guarantees success. The leader's role is to make sure that they see that. So that's the distinction between the one which succeeds and one which doesn't.
How difficult is that to get that alignment going, Anil? We know at the end of the day, when we look at a sport from outside, a team sport from outside, obviously the goal is to win, the goal is to play well and whatnot. We see it from outside. But within the team dynamics, how difficult is it to get that alignment going?
I think it boils down to communication and respect that you have amongst each other. I think it boils down to that. And once you have that, I don't think that it's difficult. So I think it's all about having the respect that you within the group, and also looking at how you are regarded within the group. I think that's very critical. And then communication becomes a very critical aspect as well. So if you have all of these, then I don't think it's tough to align everyone towards a common goal.
Yeah, different ways of communication with different people. That is something that you've spoken about in your book extensively, isn't it?
Essentially, it boils down to clarity and in how you communicate and with what conviction you communicate. As he said, respect is important, and you need to be telling everybody as to what you expect of them and where is it as a group you're trying to head. So unless you convey it, it's going to be very difficult for the others to know what exactly is expected of them. So that's the reason communication plays a very important role to align these various personalities within the team towards going towards one particular objective.
One of the fascinating things about this book is obviously it talks about international cricket. It also talks a whole lot about golf that W is extremely passionate about. He's talked about billiards. He's spoken to the former world champion in Geet Sethi. He's obviously spoken to Jeev Milkha Singh. But in terms of communication, you've also spoken a lot about international cricketers coming back to domestic cricket and finding their motivation. I mean, you've spoken about instances with respect to Murli Vijay, you've spoken about Vijay Shankar, L. Balaji, when he had those tough times with his back. Take us through those moments.
L. Balaji obviously was one who really struggled at a time when everybody thought he was going to really sort of take off after that phenomenal tour of Pakistan. So he comes down one evening and tells me, I'm totally knackered, it's not happening. So what was important was to try and make him understand that this is a setback, as against a lot of opinions which were once again judgmental. They said, no stuff. We've not come across any medium pacer who's had this kind of an injury, who's made a comeback. So it was repeatedly trying to sort of make him understand that this is some setback. It can be sort of overcome. And I said that it all depends on you at the end of the day. If you are willing to do it, go through the hard yards, then you will do it. And full credit to Balaji, because it was not an easy thing. There was a lot of emotions, there were a lot of people irritating, there were a lot of things that were sort of spoken.
Yeah, he'll be losing his spot as well in the team. So that's something somebody else comes in and starts performing really well.
And then it came to a stage where he was not even sure he was ever going to play cricket. Yeah. It was that bad. And frankly speaking, a couple of them after Balaji had surgeries, similar surgeries, they have not made a comeback into even domestic cricket, let alone making a comeback into the Indian side like Balaji did. But full credit to Balaji at the end of the day, because he had to go through all that, the physical pain, the mental torture, and all these frustrations, and trying to sort of keep this going and keep his fitness going, and also endure whatever an operation entails. So it's not easy. It is all up to him. It's easy for me to say this is what it is, but the point is, at the end of the day, the guy who's on the other side of the fence, he's important. It's all about him or her wanting to do that.
Yeah, but Madhavan, it's still about saying the right things to the people, isn't it? Because they come to you, or you are their leader. It's still about saying the right things at the right time, even as far as business goes.
Yeah, actually, there was a time when you do an annual appraisal and make sure that you communicate at the end of the year. Too much time is lost. Today, those days are gone. You have to constantly communicate with your leaders and keep reinforcing what we had agreed upon. It's not about telling him that he's going right or he's doing right or he's doing wrong. It's about reinforcing the agreement that we have had and where the issues are and how we can help him. That's the kind of conversation today that happens there. And pretty much like what you do in cricket, like it's about the rules and responsibilities of the individual. Here it's about unit level economics. If I invested in a person and he's responsible for a particular business in a particular territory, then give him the free hand and then constantly check what help does he need, what kind of resourcing does he need. If there's an issue, how can I help him out? That gone are the days when you talk once in a year. Even in corporate world, it now happens very frequently. If it's not monthly, it's definitely a quarterly conversation that we have. So that's how things have changed there.
How difficult as an athlete is it to pick up from that position where you are low, Anil? Because you've had injuries in your career. So how difficult is it? WB obviously spoke about the fact that there are people who can come and tell you. You've been on both sides. You've spoken to people. You've been injured yourself. As an athlete, it's fine for somebody, as WB said, to go and speak to that athlete and say, look, it's a setback. You can come back. But how difficult is it for the athlete to believe that it is only a setback and therefore I can bounce back?
Yeah, it's never easy because I went through a shoulder operation and was out of the team for almost a year. During that period, I'm human. I do get negative thoughts. Will I be able to bowl? Will I be able to come back? Somebody else has come in and done well, so will I be able to come back and take my place? I think those times you need people around you who are very supportive. I had very good people around me who were very supportive. And there was an example in Javagal Srinath who had also had a shoulder surgery and come back into playing international cricket. So I knew that if I put in all the hard yards, then eventually it will happen. I don't think, the one thing that happens when you're injured and then when you're doing your rehab, you want to get there. You want to come back quickly. That's something that I constantly fought against. saying, no, I don't want to come back soon. I want to just take my time, make sure that when I come back, I'm ready to bowl, rather than go in early and then make a mess of what I can. So I think it's important to just make sure that you are eventually fit 100% before you walk into the game. So for me, it helped. I was lucky that as soon as I came back, I got wickets, and then I was fully fit. It took me almost 3.5 months to lift my hand up. So in those 3.5 months, the mind constantly told me that, look, will you be able to bowl? You can't even lift your hand. Yeah. So yes, those times you need the family around you, and you want people to be encouraging rather than sympathizing. I think you don't want people to come and say, oh no, if you were there, you would have done this. You don't want such things. You just want to focus on your rehab, like Ram mentioned about the process, not really worry about eventually, 10 months later, this is what I'm going to do. I think it's important to just look at one day at a time and then go through, keep ticking those boxes every day.
Yeah, that's another example that you've brought about in your book, isn't it? Pulela Gopichand is a classic example that you've spoken about. He had at least 3 knee surgeries before he eventually won that All England Badminton Championships in 2001. So that's the crux, isn't it? The mental side of things. And you've devoted an entire chapter to the mental training per se. Just explain a bit further on that.
Yeah, when I spoke to all those icons, they were fantastic in their views and the way they saw things. Like Gopichand, it was almost like he wished for an injury, because he knew he was getting older, according to him, not to me. According to him, he was getting older, and the All England Championship was coming up. He said, yes, what happens? He said, yes, if there's an injury, this is how I'm going to treat it. And he did have one a few months before the All England Championship. But again, he overcame that. He had a lot of surgeries. And he said, regardless of all that, whenever I'm on the court, he told himself that I'm going to be at my best. I'm not going to try and play within myself, which meant that he was not going to really prepare as well as he needed to for the All England Championship. So they all understand that injuries and lack of form is a part of a sporting life. And they look a little bit ahead along those lines and see what needs to be done in case it happens. Not that they're looking at it negatively. They're looking at various obstacles they may have to overcome, and that's the way they look at it.
Which brings me to the subject of things that you can control and things that you cannot control. I'm sure we know what businesses are like. I mean, you have your policies, but I'm sure outside of your environment, there are so many things that can change. How do you prepare yourself and not entirely worry about things that are beyond your control?
So there are 2 parts to it. One is the output KPI, which is result. You are not in control of that all the time. It's the input KPI, which is your process. Simply put, process. So we look at what are I'm very clear in the organization that I run. These are a set of things that we do. If you do this well, even if you do it 80% of the time right, and if you don't get the desired result, don't worry, blame is on me. I will answer the investing management. But if you don't do that part right, then you will have to face the consequences. So it's about getting the input, and you're going to have bad patch. See, like you're doing well, competition is also going to do well at some point in time. So you're going to have your bad patch, like it happens in sport. But as long as you did that part right, the input KPI is right, you're taken care of.
In a sense, from just borrowing from what he said, Mr. Madhavan said, it's a bit like leadership, isn't it? The minute he's going to say to his boys that, look, let's do this, I will take it if there is something that goes on. That also builds a trust towards that leader, isn't it, in sport?
Also, in sport, the emphasis and the focus sometimes shifts too much on the competition, on the opposition. Instead of that, I think it's important to just understand what the strengths of the team are and then set goals for the team to achieve rather than worry about who the opposition is. So as long as you achieve those goals within your team, then I think, like what Madhavan mentioned, it's very easy for you to get the result. And you know exactly where you're going wrong. That's the critical aspect as well, that in any process, you need to identify where you're going wrong. If you can't do that, then you'll never be able to fix it. You'll keep guessing and then trying hard to fix that. So it's very important that you put a process in place and make sure that your focus is generally on your team rather than the opposition. And yes, you have to keep tweaking that based on the conditions, the situations, and who you're going to face next. And you have to keep, varying your goals within your team. So I think those things matter the most. And if you can keep a track of that, invariably the result takes care.
Interesting that they mentioned that about worrying more about yourself or concentrating more on yourself, because I remember speaking once to a World Cup winner from France. He was also a winner of Euro. The late 90s was a wonderful period for France. So he said that, look, so I was just curious to understand how, say, a team like France goes about preparing against Germany or, say, a few other nations. He says when we play the likes of Germany or a few other top-notch nations, we obviously look at their strengths and weaknesses. But when we look at a few other nations that are going to play us, we are the world champions, and therefore we concentrate more on our strengths, and it's their business to worry about the way we approach. And there's another thing that Anil was talking about and Madhavan was talking about in terms of setting goals. Now, when people start playing cricket, obviously you start off playing in the streets, you enjoy the game. It's purely for enjoyment. So how do you keep shifting your goals, the goal posts quite literally, as you grow? That is something that you have mentioned broadly as well, and also with respect to a few athletes that you have spoken to at the domestic level.
Yeah, when it all starts, it's all fun. You're making friends, you want to while away time with your friends, and what happens is once you realize that there is something that you're doing better than the rest, you look towards excelling. So that desire to excel, keeps making you progress, and it's all from then on. It's all about excellence, achieving excellence, and trying to make the best of the talent that you have. And as long as you're looking at excelling yourself, I'm sure that you'll always scale the heights that you want to scale.
Potential versus performance, is that where it comes to? Because I know you can set goals, but I'm sure there are goals that are realistic with respect to the potential. How do you unlock that in business?
So, when we identify a talent, get him on board, we know that he can be stretched to a particular limit, and it's never a normal goal. The expectation is always 1.5x, 2x. So we assess how much he can stretch, and then based on that, then you set a goal saying that, look, this is what is the expectation. Also, we have to be fair what the conditions are in the marketplace, how is competition playing out, what's the economy like. In a situation like this, the industry that I am in, the sector that I'm in, the mood is not great. So we need to be realistic about that, and then see within those constraints and with what resource I can put in, how much I can stretch him. It's always that stretched but realistic goal. That's what you set, and then keep track of that.
Much the same in cricket, isn't it, Anil? A captain is as good as his team, isn't it, they say?
Yeah, I think you need certainly a team for you to win a match. It's not just a captain. Yes, you need to use your resources really well. And for me, it is all about having a core set of players who will contribute to the common purpose. And I think that's the critical aspect for me. You will have, I think as a team, how well can you disguise your sort of shortcomings is the critical aspect in any situation, because no team can be complete. It's very difficult to get a complete team. If you have, that's great, but it's very unlikely that you're going to get that. How well can you make sure that you throw in your punches at the right time? I think that's the major aspect. So I think understanding the situation, understanding and assessing what needs to be done. If you have personnel that you can look up to in different situations, you need a team which can stand up to different situations. That's what you want in an ideal team.
I can honestly go on and on, because there are so many fascinating aspects that have been covered during the course of my reading of this book. WB has obviously ventured into Robert Kiyosaki. He's spoken about Warren Buffett. He's talked about Frederick Fawcett. Clint Eastwood, I'm sure, is one of his favorites, so he's touched upon that as well. So there are a variety of things that we can go on and on about. But if I were to ask one final question to all three of you, maybe I'll start with UWE. When you're looking at a player, say a youngster, what is that one thing that you would look at?
Yes, obviously look at talent, but the point is a good indication about a player is the way or the pace at which a young player improves, according to me. Everything else, is secondary. If the kid has got the desire to improve and he goes on to improve, that is what I'd look at.
Anil?
I'd like to look at how he bounces back after failure. I think if someone's had a bad game, how does he come back out of it? I think that's what I'd like to look at.
Hunger to win.
Okay, simple as that. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Wonderful. I'm sure we can go on and on. I'm sure plenty of you have plenty of questions, but I'm afraid we're just about running short of time. So what we will do at the moment is probably the most important part of this afternoon. It's the formal unveiling of the book. May I kindly request gentlemen to be... May I kindly request Rahul Dravid to please come forward. Thank you so much, Rahul, for taking your time out and being a part of this occasion. If you can... Right, may I kindly ask Mr. W. Raman to present a copy of the book to Anil Kumble so that he can unveil it formally. Congratulations. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, to W. Raman. Yeah, if a copy of the book could be presented to Mr. Madhavan and Mr. Rahul Dravid as well. Anil, if you can... That's easier, yeah? Do you want that? Can I pick those up? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. One more.